So, Dr. Evan O'Neill Kane. Anybody ever heard of that guy before? He was the chief surgeon at the Kane Summit Hospital, where he worked for most of his career. Kane was a big believer that local anesthesia was safer than general anesthetic. He felt like you should only use general anesthetic when there was no other choice, because it often had serious complications. But this was about 100 years ago, and local anesthesia was not yet accepted in the medical community. So he started by amputating his own finger, which seems pretty doable. It needed to be amputated, it wasn't just for show. Especially with anesthetic, a finger amputation, that makes sense. But in 1921, he personally developed appendicitis. Before his own surgery, he had performed over 4,000 appendectomies and decided that it would be more practical and safer to do them under local anesthetic. So it was something he didn't dare to try on one of his patients, because if it didn't go well, it would be malpractice. So now he had to volunteer himself. On February 15, 1921, Kane rested himself on pillows and put up mirrors so that the surgeon, that is himself, could get a good look at the situation during the surgery. Kane injected himself with Novocaine, that's what they used in those days, cut himself, tied off the necessary blood vessels, and began looking for his own appendix. He reportedly chatted and laughed throughout the surgery and managed to successfully remove his appendix before the wound was closed by his brother, who was also a surgeon, who had been there observing just in case he got into trouble. So, do you see surgery as a do-it-yourself task? Although I have to say, I had an appendectomy with general anesthetic, and I was really happy. I had a spinal, and I was awake and able to talk with them as it was going on. Okay? So, is there one organ that you could never remove or repair by yourself? There's actually a couple of them. Your brain, okay? You cannot remove or repair your own brain. And your heart. So it is the brain and the heart that we have to depend upon God to do the surgery and for God to do the repair. So let's start Jeremiah 13:23. It states, "Can an Ethiopian change his skin or a leopard his spots?" No, right? Neither can you do good who are accustomed to doing evil. That's bad news. That you can't just decide that you're going to do better and do better. You can't change your character. It is not a do-it-yourself task to change your character. But our call to worship this morning, and I love how it reads in the New Living Translation. It says, "I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you." Okay, just for starters, who needs a new heart? We all need a new heart, okay? And we all need a new spirit. It's not just that he takes our heart out, he gives us a new one. Okay? "I will take out your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart." In many of the other versions, it says a heart of flesh. But what it means is a tender, responsive heart. Years ago, I found on our beach on Shaw Island a little stone-shaped rock. And I put it in my coat pocket. Heart-shaped stone. Yes, heart-shaped stone. And I put it in my coat pocket because we had teenagers. And having teenagers in your home just makes everything complicated. You know, it's complicated to know how to deal with them in a kind but firm way, a loving way. And it also created all kinds of tension between Mark and I, who had very different ideas on how to solve our teenagers' problems. And I needed to be reminded that God was still going to work in my heart, help me love my kids, help me love my husband. And I think I had that in my pocket for nearly 10 years. And then I took it to a women's conference where I was the speaker. And I used it as an illustration and I passed it around. And somebody put it in their pocket and never gave it back to me. And what can I say but by that point, God had given me a tender, responsive heart. And I wasn't needing to pray for it every single day like I was at the time I found it. Okay, so here is God's promise. By the way, who is the acting character? What is our role? Just to receive it. That's all we have to do, is let him do the surgery. You know, when I had my appendix out, I was 28 weeks pregnant. And I remember I'm being pushed very quickly in my wheelchair to the operating room, and they're handing me forms. You know what those forms are? Consent to treat. All we have to do with God is give him the consent to treat. All we have to do is say, please take care of this problem. And I was in so much pain, I was really glad that they'd found what the problem was and that they were going to take care of it. Okay? Here, the next verse tells us, I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Okay, again, who is the actor? God is the one doing the work. He puts it in us, and he will move us to want to be obedient. Isn't that lovely? Even obedience is a gift. We cannot be obedient in our own strength, by our own choice, by our own willpower. We are only obedient as God creates a heart that wants to be obedient. The promise of this new heart is further explained in Jeremiah 31, and verse 31 begins. And by the way, this passage was copied into our scripture reading this morning. And in Hebrews, the passage is the longest Old Testament quotation in the New Testament. Okay, so this is where it started, and that's where it was applied in the New Testament setting. And if you read the book of Jeremiah, the context is the people were failing miserably. They were into idolatry. They were not being true or faithful to God. And God was going to have to get heavy-handed with them. They were nearly ready to be hauled off to Babylon, right? And Jeremiah, what is his nickname? Prophet of Tears, because he had the worst job of probably any character in the whole Bible, because not only did they not accept his message, they kept putting him in prison and down in a wet well, and he was treated horribly. And in the end, he was hauled away. He didn't even get to stay in his own land because the people were just so stubborn and so rebellious. And he kept giving these messages from God, which they kept rejecting. So can you imagine how Jeremiah felt when God said, I'm going to take care of this problem. I'm going to give them obedient hearts. Whoa. I'm going to help them to listen to me. So it begins, Jeremiah 31:31. The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Okay? It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. So, was the problem with the old covenant the laws that it contained? What was the problem with the old covenant? The stubborn, unrepentant hearts, right? The problem was the hearts of the people. But, he says, this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel from that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds. I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Okay, let's talk about him writing his laws on our heart. The word covenant feels like an old-fashioned word. Anybody know what it means? It's a contract, but it is a very serious contract that usually is personal between two people or two or more people. This is the uniqueness of the word covenant, because it is this combination of both love and law. No other English word works for the word covenant. It's the language of love and intimacy, personal, possessive pronouns. Do you see it? I will put my law in their minds. I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God. They shall be my people. So I have a 10-week-old kitten whose picture was supposed to go there. But I couldn't ever get my iPhone to be able to transfer it in a way that I could get it into this PowerPoint. So you have to imagine my 10-week-old kitten. His name is Inky. He's white with very irregular black spots. There's nothing symmetrical about this kitten. Has a black nose and a black chin and two little black tears that come down from its eyes like a clown. And then the blotches and splotches all over Inky's back are lopsided, completely lopsided. He looks like he was a white kitten that fell into a bottle of ink, which is why his name is Inky. Well, several times a day, when we are enjoying each other, I'll have this kitten. He wants to be as close to my face as he can get. He's about this big, you know. He's like right here. He's purring, and I will say this: I will be your human, and you will be my cat. Okay, that's a covenant, right? I'm making this covenant relationship with this little animal. It's amazing how much religious jargon happens in a pastor's family. When we lose something, we use the verbiage of the Good Shepherd when he finds a sheep. Rejoice with me, I have found my keys, which were lost. And things like that, or when we go out into our yard and it's a pile of work, Mark will say, is this not great Babylon I have built? Okay, so we just kind of, and we both get it, and it's a way we have fun with each other. Okay, so when I say to Inky, I will be your human, and you will be my cat, what I'm promising is, I will feed you, I will pet you, I will play with you, I will take you to the vet, I'll make sure every single flea that came on you from your family of origin is gone. I love you too much to leave you the way you are. I'm going to get rid of those fleas. And his part of the covenant is to sleep on my lap and purr when I pet him. Who's doing the work? I am, definitely. And that's kind of like the covenant that God makes with us, too. It is this covenant where He is doing all the work and we just get to receive it. Covenants include the language of law, sealing with an oath to confirm it. Think of a wedding vow at a marriage ceremony. And unfortunately, so many modern relationships just skip that step. And they don't have the security and the blessing of being in this covenant relationship that combines both love and law and promise to keep those promises. A covenant is a relationship that's made more loving and more intimate because there's been vows to be faithful. Modern society is all about the fulfillment of the individual self. And what many couples say is, I will be what I should be as long as you're what you should be. Right? A covenant is different. It's, I will be what I should be, whether or not you are who you should be. And man, in a marriage, do we need that? Two parties are each saying, you are more important to me than me. I'll be committed to the relationship whether it is presently meeting my needs or not. I just read Beth Moore's autobiography, All My Knotted Up Life. And her husband is bipolar and has post-traumatic stress because he was with his little brother when he blew himself up and burned to death. And they were just kids. So her husband ended up having a fishing accident where one of the fish's quills, the little spikies on the fish's back, poked him, ended up with a horrible infection. And in the process of treating that infection, it triggered his bipolar big time. And he was totally checked out for nearly 3 years. Made him so sick he could not function, could not carry on a conversation, had no interest in being a husband. And she just stood with him and beside him. And by the end of the book, she's the one in crisis, and he's the one encouraging and standing beside her. We need to say, I will be who I should be, whether or not you can do your part of this agreement. Okay? Now, not all relationships are covenantal. For example, the relationship with your grocer. You can even know each other by name. The checkout girl I always go through at the QFC in Squim, she knows who I am. She knows almost every order I have a plant or two. And she knows I like to do the e-coupons and the whole bit. Okay? But if the QFC does not provide the best prices or the freshest produce, and I can get a better deal at Costco, I'll go to Costco. You can, without apology, just go to the next store. Okay? Not all relationships are covenantal. Only the really important ones require covenants. So the best examples of covenantal relationships are marriage and the relationship between parents and children. Although that parental covenant is usually unspoken. Although I used to sing this little song, I'll love you forever, I'll love you for always, as long as you're living, my baby you'll be, a little book, kid's book. And I would sing that to my children, and I'll say, I've always loved you, and I always will. I say that all the time. Well, modern people now say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. What are they saying? They're saying, I believe in God, but I don't want a commitment. I don't want to have to attach myself to a church. I don't want a relationship with God that's going to cost me anything. Therefore, I'll just be spiritual and not religious. I don't want a covenantal relationship with God. But God can truly only be in relationship with us if it is covenantal. And the blessings of being his people are dependent upon us being in covenant relationship with him. There's so much to be gained in the process. So, the new covenant is God's pledge to, first of all, make us effective witnesses. In Jeremiah 31:34, it includes this that wasn't in the Hebrews passage. No longer will a man teach his neighbor or a man his brother, saying, know the Lord. For they all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. Can you imagine having every single member of your family knowing Jesus? And every single neighbor knowing Jesus? Wouldn't that be incredible? And every single person in our church family so in love with Jesus that they never misbehaved? Wow. Okay, when the new covenant is in full effect, our witnesses will be so persuasive that the people will say, how'd you do that? And you can tell them, Jesus changed my heart. Jesus gave me a new life. Jesus wrote his law on my mind, and now I want to do it right. Isn't that just, this is the end result, is that the people around us will also know him and believe in him. But it still is going to get even better. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. Now, does God have amnesia? No, he has a really good mind and he has a really good rememberer. He's saying, I will choose not to remember your sins. In fact, there's a Bible verse where he says, I'm going to cast them into the depths of the sea, where I'm not going to dredge them back up and throw them back in your face. I will remember their sins no more. Wow. That's a lot of freedom. So these are the 4 promises that are there in the new covenant. I'll write my laws on their hearts and minds. I will be their God. They will be my people. Everyone will know me personally, and I'll give you a good witness. And I will remember your sin no more. Wow, do we need these promises? Amen. Wow, for sure. So this is the central mystery of the Bible. It's on every page in pretty much every book. God says, I can't bless you when you're disobeying me, because you have to figure out that there's a better way. And if I just heap on the blessings, you're not going to learn. I have to withhold my blessings, let you feel the consequences of your bad choices. He says, I cannot wink at guilt, and I can't simply overlook it. I'm too just and too holy for that. But he also says, I will never leave you or forsake you. So he's in this tension. This is, I'm holy and you're not, but I'm going to be with you, and I'm never leaving, I'm never giving up. How is he going to work that out? So, Genesis 12:2-3, he promises Abram, this was one of the original covenants. He says, I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing. How many of us want to be a blessing? Absolutely. That's what we're living for, is to make a difference in this world. He says, I'm going to do this for you. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. Now, I've had a few people in my life who've cursed me. You know what? I just say, I'm going to tell God on you. I'm not going to curse you back. I'm just going to say, you heard that. Jesus, you heard that. Take care of the problem. Either change their heart or bring them around or whatever. All the people on earth will be blessed through you. And then later, he comes back and makes an even deeper covenant. And what the Lord had Abraham do, and this is such an incredible story. He says, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. So Abraham brought him all the livestock, and then Abraham cut them all in two. Now that would be kind of a hard job, wouldn't it? Like a butcher kind of job, but right smack down the middle. Cut them in two, and then arrange the halves on opposite sides of each other with a path down the middle. And the way that in Old Testament times they would make a covenant is the two people making a covenant would walk down through the slaughtered animals and say, if I break the covenant, this is what's going to happen to me. Is I'm going to die, I'm going to be slaughtered, I'm going to be beaten up. Okay? So, in this passage in Genesis 15, God never makes Abraham walk down that path. Instead, usually the servant is the one who walks the path. But in this case, it was God himself. When the sun had set and the darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared, and it passed between the pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham. What God was saying to Abraham was, if you break the covenant, I will take it on myself, and I will never break the covenant. Isn't that just amazing? So, God was promising to take the punishment when Abraham failed. He was saying, I will bless you even if I literally have to be torn to pieces. And you know, there was thick darkness on Calvary that Friday afternoon. Jesus was being torn to pieces, and he was fulfilling the covenant that the people could not ever fulfill themselves. He says, I'll take it on me. I'll take the punishment on myself. Paul says that Christ redeemed us by becoming sin for us. And what do we get as he takes our sin? We might become the righteousness of God through him. He trades us places. It is the greatest trade ever made, that he takes our sin and we get his righteousness. And then this passage, and this was in our Sabbath school lesson this morning, Romans 3 says God presented him as a sacrifice of atonement through faith in his blood. We're going to come back to that idea of blood. He did this to demonstrate his justice, because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. Okay? So God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through faith in his blood. Those that have faith in his blood become made right with God again. That's what atonement means. He did it to demonstrate his justice, so as to be just and the one who justifies those with faith in Jesus Christ. But what God is basically saying, this is the only way I can be both holy and merciful and forgiving, is if I take it upon myself. And that's what Jesus did. So here's the beautiful truth. With his perfect life, Jesus met the terms of the covenant, and he earned a blessing. With his sacrificial death, Jesus fulfilled the punishment for breaking it, and he took the curse. And so this leads us to a paradoxical obedience. And until you grasp it, you're looking at blessings as either conditional or unconditional. But this is the marvelous truth. This is the thing. One thing I want you to take away today. Jesus fulfilled the conditions of the covenant so that we could be loved unconditionally. He died to fulfill God's will, which was to put us back into relationship with us, where he could be our God and we could be his people. Jesus died so that this could happen. And there's all kinds of good news because this happened. When I do fail, there's no condemnation. Ah, isn't that great? So what we do is we resist sin like crazy. And let me tell you, sometimes I fight so hard, especially negativity. I mean, almost every time I sin, it's with my mouth. And I just have to say, Lord, please, I need you to write on my mind and give me a new tender heart that believes you can do what you said that you would do. Resist sin like crazy, but don't fall into despair when you sin. Don't let it suck you into an even deeper hole by getting so discouraged. When you understand the gospel, you are willing to be accountable, but you also trust him to be able to take care of it. In his helpful little book, Practicing the Presence of God, which is one of my very favorite of all books other than the Bible, Brother Lawrence tells what he does. This was in the 1600s, so what he did when he realized he had sinned. He says he falls on his face before his good Father and says, "Unless you help me, I can do no other." And isn't that true? When you realize that you've sinned, you look to God and you say, this is who I am, this is what I do. This is not an abnormal behavior, this is to the core who I am. I need your help. I need you to help me or I cannot ever fix myself. I can't fix myself. But then he asks for help, he asks for forgiveness, and then the end of that paragraph, I love it. He says, then I think no more about the matter. God has promised me both help and forgiveness, and he keeps his promises. Okay, this new covenant is God promising us both help and forgiveness. And when we accept the new covenant by taking the communion, what we're doing is receiving it and saying, I believe you will do this for me. You will give me your help and you will give me your forgiveness. Okay? So, this is interesting. Okay, you need to forward it for me if you can. Always have to have a glitch. It's just part of... Okay. The old covenant failed because men were sinful. The new covenant succeeds because God sent his son. And what the law was powerless to do because it had some sinful nature attached, God accomplished by sending his own son in the likeness of sinful man to be an offering. It took Jesus for God to be able to keep the new covenant with us. Jesus is basically the essence of the new covenant. That it's all about him and not about us is the essence of the new covenant. Okay? And then, this is what it said next. And he condemned sin in sinful man in order that the righteous requirements of the law might be fully met in us, who do not live according to the sinful nature, but according to the Spirit. When Jesus comes to live in our hearts, he covers us with his forgiveness, with his righteousness, and then he has opportunity to work on us from the inside. All right, which is pretty wonderful. So, it's very clear that God will not give up. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. Okay, how many of you have had God begin a good work? You wouldn't be here this morning if God had not been working on you. The promise is he will not give up on you. That's pretty amazing. He's going to carry it on to completion. Okay, so now we want to look at how the New Testament tells us that the new covenant is applied to our lives. First of all, it's by blood, Jesus' blood, that we can have the assurance of salvation, that our consciences can be cleansed. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God. Once the new covenant has been applied to us, the end result is we are free now to serve God without a whole boatload of baggage on our back. We're free to serve him, which is pretty wonderful. That's why at the Last Supper, this is what Jesus said. He took the cup, he gave thanks and offered it to them, and he said, "Drink from it, all of you. This is the blood of my covenant, of the covenant." Okay, his blood is what ratified the new covenant for us, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. His blood is what was necessary for that new covenant to take effect. All right? And now he can put his laws in our minds and write them on our heart because we love him. We see his character, we see his love on the cross, and our hearts just respond by saying, "I want to please you. I want to do things your way. I don't want to hurt you anymore, Jesus." It becomes a relationship that's built on the fact that he died for us. And so the law is no longer external. I love this verse too. This is love for God, to obey his commands. And his commands are not burdensome. So what should you do if you find one of his commands burdensome? Find your way back to the cross. And by the way, we now have one we can kneel in front of. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Bill. What a lovely, lovely piece of artwork to fix our minds on what Jesus did for us. But if we spend time thinking about Jesus every single day, that's how he writes the desire to obey upon our hearts. Hebrews 10 says this, "Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place," how? By the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is his body. And since we have this great high priest over the house of God, what are we supposed to do in Hebrews 10? Let us draw near to God. Okay, because all of these things have been provided for us, now we can come near to God. And how do we come near to God? With the full assurance of faith. We come right into his presence like we belong there because he opened the way for us to do that. Having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and having our bodies washed with pure water. Well, you're all going to get your feet washed with pure water. But that cleansing of the guilty conscience. Several years ago, Mark was doing a communion sermon, and he really struggles. He beats himself up a lot. Just, he's so bright, and he really does love the Lord, but when he fails, he has to punish himself for a while. And I live with him doing this and keep on trying to talk him out of that. Don't do that to yourself. He forgave you. He's forgiving you, And he came out of communion, and we were walking to the car, and he raised his hands and he says, I'm clean. You know what? You all can leave this church today saying, I'm clean. You get a brand new start, not only with your baptism, but on Communion Day, which is pretty awesome. All right? So, couple last verses, almost there. So, because we have all these things in place of the new covenant, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we professed. Why? Okay, he keeps his promises. And what he's just promised us, even that we've looked at this morning, is pretty amazing. All right, then it says, the new covenant equips us to do good works. May the God of peace, who through the blood of the eternal covenant brought back from the dead our Lord Jesus Christ, equip you with everything good for doing his will. The new covenant gives you what you need so that you can do his will. Everything good for doing his will. And may he work in us what is pleasing to him. Again, who is the actor here? God. Who's the recipient? Us. Okay, he works in us what is pleasing to him through Jesus Christ, to whom be the glory forever and ever. Amen. That's the end result of receiving the new covenant, is he gives you what you need then to live the life you always wanted to live and have never had the strength or the power to before. All right, one last verse. This also was in the Sabbath school lesson this morning. For it's God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. He's the one doing the work. We're the ones just giving the consent to treat. After John Wesley had been preaching for some time, one of the people listening to him walked up to him and said, "Are you sure, Mr. Wesley, of your salvation?" "Well," he answered, "Jesus Christ died for the whole world." "Yes, we all believe that, but are you sure that you are saved?" Wesley replied that he was sure the provision had been made for his salvation. "But are you sure, Wesley, that you are saved?" And suddenly that went like an arrow to his heart, and he had no rest or power until the question was settled. And sometimes pastors talk about drawing a circle and just not getting up from your knees until you're sure that you've been saved. Many men and women go on month after month, year after year, without power, because they don't trust that God will do what he said he was going to do. Okay? They do not know their standing in Christ. They are not sure of their own footing for eternity. Latimer wrote Ridley, and I have no idea who either of these guys are, once that when he was settled and steadfast about his own salvation, he was bold as a lion. But if that hope became eclipsed, he was fearful and afraid and felt disqualified for service. So if you don't feel like you're good enough to do what he's asking you to do, go back and talk to him about what he's already done and accomplished for you. Many are disqualified for service because they are continually doubting their own salvation. So we're going to take the emblems of Christ's body and blood in just a few minutes. What we are doing as we eat that bread and drink that wine is accepting this new covenant. Accepting that Jesus will do what he's promised to do in and for us. He will keep his promises so we can rejoice and let him fill us with joy and peace and power as we believe that our God is faithful to keep his promises. Okay? We're going to do the service of humility, and the ladies will be in the office downstairs, single men in the middle classroom, and then couples will be in the third classroom down, second class, yeah. All right? And if you end up in the wrong place, just turn around quick. All right? And then when we're done, we're going to come up and we're going to celebrate by accepting this new covenant once again today.